Good day, sir. I'm Jason A. Omandak, the Group 9 reporter. Our topic today is all about trace the development of the Philippine Constitution by emphasizing its salient features. What is a constitution? A constitution is a set of fundamental principles according to which a state or other organization is governed. It symbolizes the country's freedom and independence. The Philippine Constitution has evolved since 1897. The 1897 Constitution of Biak na Bato, the 1899 Malolos Constitution, Acts of the United States Congress Philippine Organic Act of 1902, Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916, and Tidings MacDowell Act of 1934. The 1935 Constitution, the 1943 Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, the 1986 Freedom Constitution, and the 1987 Constitution. The 1897 Constitution of Biak na Bato, Constitution Provincial de la República de Filipinos. The Tejeros Convention, held at San Francisco de Malabon in Cavite on March 22, 1897, was the result of the Katipunan Revolution. The elected president was Emilio Aguinaldo and the vice president was Mariano Trias. The Constitution, written by Isabelo Artacho and Felix Ferrer, was promulgated by the Katipunan. Operated only from November 1, 1897 to December 14, 1897. Emilio Aguinaldo established his headquarters in Biak na Bato in Bulacan Province. The news immediately spread throughout the country and the revolutionaries were once more in high spirits. General Illanera, who was in Nueva Ecija, declared his support for Aguinaldo in July 1897. So dito ay tinatag ni Emilio Aguinaldo ang kanyang punong tanggapan sa Biak na Bato sa lalawigan ng Bulacan at ang balita ay agad kumalat sa buong bansa at ang mga revolusyonaryo ay muling nabuhayan ng loob at si General Illanera na nasa Nueva Ecija ay nagpahayag ng kanyang suporta kay Aguinaldo noong Hulyo 1897. Aguinaldo established the Biak na Bato Republic and issued a proclamation stating the following demands. Ito si General Mariano Illanera. The first is expulsion of the friars and the return of the friar lands of the Filipinos. So dito po ay ang pagpapatalsik sa mga praile at pagbabalik ng lupaing praile sa mga Pilipino. The second is representation of the Philippines in the Spanish Cortes. Dito naman po ay ang representasyon ng Pilipinas sa Espanyol Cortes. Freedom of the press and of religion. Dito naman po ay ang kalayaan sa pamamahayag ng relihiyon. Abolition of the government's power to banish Filipinos. The last, equality for all before the law. A charter based on the Cuban Constitution was also drafted by Felix Ferrer and Isabelo Artacho. It was signed on November 1, 1897. The Biak na Bato Constitution provided for the establishment of a Supreme Council that would serve as the highest governing body of the Republic. It also outlined certain basic human rights such as freedom of religion, freedom of press, and the right of education. Emilio Aguinaldo and Mariano Trias were elected Supreme Council President and Vice President respectively. Dito naman ang isang charter batay sa konstitusyon ng Cuba ay binalangkas din ni Felix Ferrer at Isabelo Artacho. Ito ang nilagdaan noong Nobyembre 1, 1897. Ang konstitusyon ng Biak na Bato ay nagtadhana para sa pagtatag ng isang kataas-taasang konseho na magsisilbing pinakamataas na namamahala sa Republika. Binalangkas din ito ang ilang pangunahing karapatang pantao tulad ng kalayaan sa relihiyon, kalayaan sa pamamahayag at karapatan sa edukasyon. Sina Emilio Aguinaldo at Mariano Trias ay nahalal na Supreme Council na President at Vice President ayon sa pagkakasunod. Po si Felix Ferrer at si Isabelo Artacio. The Pact of Biak na Bato. Pedro Paterno, a Spaniard born in the Philippines, volunteered to act as negotiator between Aguinaldo and Governor Primo de Rivera. Pact of Biak na Bato with Pedro Paterno and Emilio Aguinaldo in order to end the clashes. Paterno's effort paid off when on December 15, 1897. The pact he signed the pact as the representative of the revolutionaries and de Rivera as the representative of the Spanish government. The leaders are Emilio Aguinaldo, President, Mariano Trias, Vice President, Antonio Montenegro, Secretary, Baldomero Aguinaldo, Treasurer, and Emilio Rego de Dios. Dito naman ay si Pedro Paterno ay isang Kastila na ipinanganak sa Pilipinas ay nagbubuluntaryong kumilos bilang negosyador sa pamamagitan ni Aguinaldo at Gobernador Primo de Rivera. Pact of Biak na Bato kasama sina Pedro Paterno at Emilio Aguinaldo upang wakasan ang sagupaan na bunga ang pagsisikap ni Paterno noong Disyembre 15, 1877. Ang kasunduan ay nilagdaan niya ang kasunduan bilang kinatawan ng mga revolusyonaryo at si de Rivera bilang kinatawan ng pamahalaang Espanyol. Ang mga pinuno ay sina Emilio Aguinaldo ay isang presidente, Mariano Trias ay isang vice presidente, at Antonio Montenegro ay isang sekretarya. Si Bartolome Aguinaldo ay isang treasurer at si Emilio Riego de Dios. Ito po si Pedro Paterno at Governor Primo de Rivera. On December 23, 1897, Generals Celestino Tejero and Ricardo Monet of the Spanish Army arrived in Biak na Bato and became hostage of the rebels. A ceasefire was declared by both camps and an agreement between Aguinaldo and the Spanish force was made that the Spanish government will grant self-rule to the Philippines, and 3 years of Aguinaldo went to exile and surrender his arms. In exchange, Aguinaldo will receive 800,000 Mexican pesos as remuneration to the revolutionaries and an amnesty. After receiving a partial payment of 400,000, Aguinaldo left for Hong Kong on December 27, 1897. Some Filipino generals, however, did not believe in the sincerity of the Spaniards. They refused to surrender their arms. Nevertheless, that the doom was still sung on January 1898. Ito po yung mga tauhan sa Biak na Bato. The Biak na Bato Pact fails. The Filipinos and the Spaniards did not trust each other. As a result, periodic clashes between the two groups still took place even after Aguinaldo's departure from the country. The Spanish did not pay the entire agreed amount, continued to Spanish-American War. Dito naman ay naging nabigo ang Biak na Bato at walang tiwala ang mga Pilipino at ang mga Espanyol sa isa't isa dahil dito nagganap pa rin ang panakanakang sagumpaan sa pamamagitan ng dalawang grupo. Kahit na umalis si Aguinaldo sa bansa, hindi binayaran ng mga Espanyol ang buong nakapagsundo ang halaga at nagpatuloy pa rin ang digmaang Amerikanong-Espanyol. The Philippine Revolution, the Biak na Bato Republic of 1897. With almost of all Cavite in the hands of Spaniards, Governor General Primo de Rivera issued another decree extending the benefit of his pardon beyond May 17, 1897. His purpose was to win over the Filipinos to his policy of attraction. A few took advantage of the governor's decree, while the rest continued their resistance against the enemy. Aguinaldo, meanwhile, was in Talisay, Batangas, where he had established his headquarters. The enemy surrounded the area in the hope of capturing him, but he slipped through the Spanish cordon on June 10 and proceeded with his men to the hilly region of Morong, Rizal. With 500 picked men, he crossed the Pasig to Malapad na Bato near Guadalupe. And from here, he secretly passed through San Juan del Monte on Montalban and no to Mount Puray. After a well-earned rest, Aguinaldo and his men proceed to Biak na Bato, San Miguel de Mayomo, where he established his headquarters. News of Aguinaldo's arrival at Biak na Bato reached the towns of Central Luzon. As a consequence, armed men from Pangasinan, Zambales, and Ilocos provinces, Tarlac and Nueva Ecija, renewed their armed resistance against the enemy. From Biak na Bato, Aguinaldo and his men joined forces with those of General Mariano Llanera of Nueva Ecija and harassed the Spanish soldiers garrisoned in the Central Luzon provinces. With the coming of rainy season, Primo de Rivera's campaigns were temporarily halted. Before July 1897, Aguinaldo and his men has already established as Republican government at Biak na Bato, known as the Biak na Bato Republic. The provisional constitution of this republic was prepared by Felix Ferrer and Isabelo Artacio, who copied almost word for word the Cuban Constitution of Jimaguayo. The Biak ng Bato Constitution was signed on November 1, 1897. Its preamble states, "The separation of the Philippines from the Spanish monarchy and their formation into an independent state with its own government called the Philippine Republic has been the end sought by revolution and existing war begun on 24th of August 1896, and therefore it is named by the power delegated by the Filipino people, interpreting faithfully their desires and ambitions. We, representatives of the revolution, in a meeting at Biak na Bato, November 1, 1897, unanimously adopted the following articles from the Constitution of the state." Ito yung Biak na Bato at sa kabila naman ay mga tauhan sa Biak na Bato.
Good evening everyone, I am Gandalyn Isnancas. So we are now in the 1899 Malolos Constitution. So it was written by Felipe Calderon Roca and Felipe Bencamino after the declaration of Philippine independence from Spain on June 12, 1898. So it was signed into law and promulgated on January 21, 1899 and was in operation from January 23, 1899 to March 23, 1901. So these are the salient features of the 1899 Malolos Constitution. First, the declaration of sovereignty of the people, the enumeration of basic civil rights, the separation of the church and state, and provided for the creation of an assembly of representatives to act as the legislative body, and lastly, a parliamentary republica, the form of government. The committee to draft the Constitution was constituted and headed by Felipe Calderon and other members who belonged to the Filipino intelligentsia, who possess intellectual and moral integrity. So the members of the committee studied carefully the three constitutional drafts for consideration. First, the Mabini Constitutional Plan, the Paterno Constitutional Plan, and the Calderon Constitutional Plan. So the Mabini Plan was constitutional program of the Philippine Republic, while the Paterno Plan was based on the Spanish Constitution of 1868. So Calderon Plan was a constitution based on the constitutions of France, Belgium, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Mexico, Brazil, and Nicaragua. After thorough examination and deliberation, the committee chose the Calderon's plan and submitted to the Malolos Congress for approval. So Calderon sponsored the proposal constitution to Congress on October 8, 1898. So this was followed by the contribution of printed copies to the members of Congress. After a few days of deliberating on the sensitive article, it was changed. Thus, the state recognized the freedom of the equality of religion as well as separation of the church and state. The Malolos Constitution was approved by a majority vote of the members of the Congress and then forwarded to the President Aguinaldo for approval on November 29, 1898. The Constitution is the first document ever produced by the people's representatives anchored on sound democratic callosity and traditions. It embodied the Filipino aspirations of a government that was truly popular, representative, and responsible with the three distinct branches, the executive, legislative, and judicial. It also provided an article on the Bill of Rights that enumerated the individual's rights and privileges of the citizen. It was designed to protect them against encroachment by the government or by any individuals or group of individuals. So its basis was the social importance accorded to that individual in the democratic society, that every individual has the dignity and work which must be respected. So the Malolos Constitution had a unicameral legislature. It is unique in the sense that the legislature is superior to either the executive or the judicial branch. So Calderon reasons for the omnipotence of the legislature was that he feared the predominance of ignorant military elements who might abuse their power because they were soldiers behind Aguinaldo. So the Malolos Constitution was the symbol of unity, freedom, equality, justice, and the customs and traditions that reflect the character of the Filipino people.
The acts of the United States Congress were in operation from December 10, 1898 to March 24, 1934 because the Philippines became a U.S. territory at some point during this period as a result of the Treaty of Paris, which handed the Philippines to the United States. Muni siyang time na ang Pilipinas kay gi-colonize sa Amerika. So, ang first na nag-colonize sa atua is ang Spaniards and then ang US. During the American colonization, the Philippine Organic Act, the Philippine Autonomy Act, and the Tidings-McDuffie Act was made. So this was passed by the United States Congress and were considered as the Philippine constitutions because they provided for the fundamental political principles, and it also established the structure, procedures, powers, and duties of the Philippine government. Philippine Organic Act of 1902, also known as the Philippine Bill of 1902. As seen in the description, it provided for the creation of Philippine Assembly and bicameral legislature composed of a Philippine Commission, Upper House, and the Philippine Assembly, Lower House, where the lawmaking power was vested. This act was inspired by the United States Congress, which passed legislation on July 1, 1902. Si Henry Cooper ang nagsulat ani na act, and some would also call this as the Cooper Act. Sabay sa pagbuhat ani is the formal end of the Philippine-American War. Kini na act nag-provide siya og establishment sa elected Philippine Assembly with the following conditions: ang paghunong sa existing insurgency in the Philippine Islands, ang pagkumpleto o paglathala ng census, and 2 years of continued peace and pagkilala sa otoridad ng United States of America. Ang Directorate of Insular Affairs sa War Department ang nagatiman sa mga islands of the Philippines during this time. So, ang Bill of Rights for the Filipinos, this establishment of the Roman Catholic Church, ang paggamit sa mga executive departments are also the key provisions of this act. Establishment of a Philippine Assembly to be elected by Filipinos 2 years after a census is conducted and only after the country has experienced complete peace. The Philippine Organic Act of 1902 later on was replaced by the Philippine Autonomy Act or Jones Law atong August 29, 1916. Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916, also known as the Jones Law, amended the structure of the Philippine government that was provided for in the Philippine Bill of 1902. It removed the Philippine Commission and replaced it with the Senate, whose members were elected by the Filipino voters. Natawag ni siya na Jones Law because it was implemented by William Atkinson Jones. Mao ni siya ang pinaka-importante o pinakataas na batas sa ato 1916 hangtod 1935. So, ang first act during the American colonization, which is the Philippine Organic Act of 1902 or Philippine Bill, di ba dire gitukod ang upper house and lower house. After siya nailisan na ng Philippine Autonomy Act or Jones Law, kitanggal na ang upper house and lower houses tapos gipulihan siya og Senate, which is elected by the Filipino voters. Next is the Tidings McDuffie Act of 1934, officially the Philippine Independence. The act was authored in the 73rd United States Congress by Senator Millard E. Tidings and signed into law by U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. On March 24, 1934, the United States passed the Tidings-McDuffie Act that allowed the Filipino nation to have a self-government. A 10-year transition period was granted by this act so that Filipinos could be prepared for self-government and full independence. Pero bago nahitabo ang independence of the Filipinos, this act allowed the U.S. to keep their military forces sa atong nasod and also call up the Philippine military forces to serve the U.S. military. So the act empowered the U.S. President within 2 years following independence to negotiate matters relating to U.S. naval reservations and fueling stations in the Philippine Islands. This act also reclassified all Filipinos, including those who were living in the United States, as aliens for the purposes of immigration to America. Before this act, Filipinos were classified as U.S. nationals but not citizens, and while they were allowed to migrate freely, they were denied naturalization rights within the U.S. unless they were citizens by birth in the mainland U.S. The eventful day arrived on July 4, 1946, when the United States recognized Philippine independence in Treaty of Manila. The Philippine-American Friendship Day is celebrated every 4th of July to commemorate the Philippine independence from the United States of America.
Hello everyone, good evening. So again, I am Gwendolyn Isnanca. So we are now in the 1935 Philippine Constitution. So in July 1901, the Americans formally established the first civil government in the islands. So yung mga Amerikano, after nilang mabili ang Philippines sa Shuttle of Paris, so they started to establish the Philippine, the civil government, yung nagkaroon na ng mga gobyerno. Nagtayo na sila ng mga local government units. So, simula 1901, nagpa-eleksyon na sila. So, in fact, sa Baliwag, proud na proud yung mga tao doon. Sinasabi nga ang unang eleksyon ng mga Amerikano sa buong Pilipinas ay nangyari sa Baliwag City. During the administration of Governor General Francis Borton Harrison, 1913 to 1921, Filipinos were given a hand in running the country. So, yung mga ilustrado natin, nag-self-trained na nagtitraining na para maging government officials. So in 1916, the Philippine Autonomy Act, also known as the Jones Law of 1916, was passed, resulting to an all-Filipino legislature. So from 1918 to 1932, there were at least 5 Philippine independence missions to the United States. So the effort resulted to the passage of Tydings-McDuffie Law on March 24, 1934. So it provided for the guidelines for a constitution for a 10-year period before the actual grant of independence. So nagbunga din ang ating pagbalik-balik sa Washington sa United States. So nahingi din ang ating kalayaang mga Pilipino. So nagbunga din yung kasi mayroong napaisang Tydings-McDuffie Law noong March 24, 1934. So ito yung nagbigay na ng 10-year period 1935 to 1945 na Commonwealth period of the Philippines. So magti-training ang Philippines para magkaroon ng self-independence, ng self-governance. So the Constitution was approved by U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt on March 23, 1935. So the Filipinos ratified the Constitution on May 14, 1935. So itong si Atty. Tomas Cabile sa 202 delegates na na-elected na sumulat sa konstitusyon, so si Atty. Tomas lang ang hindi bumuto nung ito'y ipasa na. So he did not vote. So he's from Lanao, Iligan, Lanao del Norte. So hindi siya nag-vote kasi nga ang reason niya is hindi daw ito nag-reflect or nag-represent. Ang konstitusyon na ito ay hindi niya na-reflect ang saloobin ng mga taga Mindanao o ng mga taga-Lanao. So according to him, it did not reflect the sentiments of my people. So yung 1935 Constitution, yan ang litrato. As you can see, from the left side, ang pumipirmang Pangulo ng United States ng Amerika. Sa panahong yon na si Franklin D. Roosevelt. So sa tabi niya, the most handsome President of the Philippines, Manuel L. Quezon. At ito naman sa kabila, ang litrato ng deliberation ng 1935 Philippine Constitution. So we are now in the 1935 Constitution vis-a-vis the 4 elements of the state, and we begin with the national territory was defined there. So section 1 of the concept of national territory in the 1935 Constitution is the Philippines comprises all the territory ceded to the United States by the Treaty of Paris, concluded between the United States and Spain on the 10th day of December. So 1898, the limits of which are set forth in Article 3 of said treaty. So together with all the islands embraced in the treaty concluded at Washington, so between the United States and Spain on the 7th day of December. So 1900, and in the treaty concluded between the United States and Great Britain on the 2nd day of January. So 1930, and all territory over which the present government of the Philippines Island exercises jurisdiction. So treaty between the Kingdom Spain and the United States of America for cession of outlying islands of the Philippines on November 7, 1900s. So yung islands ng Cagayan of Sulu and Cebuto isinama na doon sa Philippine territory. So convention between the United States of America and Great Britain delimiting the boundary between the Philippine archipelago and the state of North Borneo, 1930. So it refers to the Tortol Islands and the Mangsi Islands. The Commonwealth and the Republic. Section 1. The government established by this Constitution shall be known as the Commonwealth of the Philippines, upon the final and the complete withdrawal of the sovereignty of the United States and the proclamation of Philippine independence. The Commonwealth of the Philippines shall be thenceforth be known as the Republic of the Philippines. So kanina, Philippine Republic, ngayon dito Commonwealth of the Philippines na magiging Republic of the Philippines after 1945. So, my government. So next, the executive power shall be vested in a President of the Philippines. So the legislative power shall be vested in National Assembly. The members of the National Assembly shall not exceed 120, shall be chosen every 3 years, and shall be apportioned among the several provinces as nearly as may be according to the number of their respective inhabitants. But each province shall have at least one member. So last, the judicial power shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as may be established by law. So next is the citizenship. So the following are citizens of the Philippines. First, those who are citizens of the Philippine Islands at the time of the adoption of this constitution. Second, those born in the Philippine Islands of foreign parents who before the adoption of this constitution had been elected to public office in the Philippine Islands. Third, those whose fathers are citizens of the Philippines. And fourth, those whose mothers are citizens of the Philippines and upon reaching the age of majority elect Philippine citizenship. So lastly, those who are naturalized in accordance with law. So pwede na hingiin ang citizenship through naturalization.
I will discuss my output tonight. The 1943 Constitution, mostly of the members of the PCPI were delegates to the convention that drafted the 1935 Constitution. The Constitution was ratified by the Popular Convention of the Kalibapi in Manila on September 7, 1943. Kalibapi, the kapisanan ng paglilingkod sa bagong Pilipinas o Kalibapi was a fascist Filipino political party that served as the sole party of the state during the Japanese occupation. It was intended to be a Filipino version of Japan's governing imperial rule, assistance association. What was the role of Kalibapi? The Japanese had already dissolved all political parties in the islands when including the pro-Japanese Gana Party and established Kalibapi as a mass movement designed to support the occupation whilst taking advantage of Filipino nationalism in the region. 2. The Second Philippines Republic was single-party authoritarian republic. Jose P. Laurel was appointed as a president by the National Assembly and was inaugurated into office in October 14, 1943, and Benigno Simeon Aquino Sr. was the Speaker of the National Assembly. Laurel was born and raised in a town south of Manila. His father served in the cabinet of Emilio Aguinaldo in the late 1990s. The younger Laurel received a law degree from the University of the Philippines in 1915 and an advanced jurisprudence degree in 1919 before earning a doctorate in civil law from Yale University in the United States. In 1920, he entered politics and was elected to the Philippine Senate in 1925, serving there until he was appointed an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court in 1930. Next, the Philippines Constitution was an operation in Japanese-controlled areas of the Philippines from October 14, 1943 to August 17, 1945. Laurel formally dissolved the Second Philippines Republic following the surrender of Japan in World War II. The 1943 Constitution was the Constitution of the Japanese-sponsored Second Republic of the Philippines. 1943 to 1945, it was recognized as legitimate and binding only in Japanese-controlled areas of the Philippines, but was ignored by the United States government and the Philippines Commonwealth government in exile. The preamble of 1943 Constitution. The Filipino people, imploring the aid of divine providence and desiring to lead a free national existence, do hereby proclaim their independence, and in order to establish a government that shall promote the general welfare,
conserve and develop the patrimony of the nation, and contribute to the creation of the world order based on peace, liberty, and moral justice do ordain this Constitution. The 1973 Constitution. The 1973 Constitution ruled the Fourth Philippines Republic from January 17, 1973 to February 22, 1986. A unicameral legislature was established. During, during this period, those members were elected for a 6 year term of office.
So, good evening. I am Patrick Adrian Pratang, the last reporter, and I am going to discuss the 1986 Constitution. In March 1986, President Aquino proclaimed a transitional constitution to last for a year. This transitional constitution is called Freedom Constitution. After the 1986 People Power Revolution, President Corazon Aquino issued Proclamation Number 3 to serve as a provisional constitution. The proclamation contained some provisions adopted from the 1973 Constitution. Powers such as government reorganization, removal of officials, appointment of a commission to draft a new and more formal constitution, which upon ratification would supplant from Freedom Constitution. So basically, it is a verbatim copy of the 1973 Constitution minus the provision of the Batasang Pambansa. So moving on to the next topic. So since the 1986 Freedom Constitution is just a transitional constitution that lasted for a year, a new commission was created to draft a new constitution, which was the 1987 Constitution. The 1987 Constitution revolves around four themes. First, upholding national sovereignty. Second, democratic governance and the prevention of another dictatorship. Third, respect for human rights and civil liberties. Fourth, promotion of social justice. The 1987 Constitution provided for three governmental powers, namely the executive branch headed by the President and the Cabinet whom he appoints, the legislative branch that resides in a Congress divided into two houses, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives, the judiciary that vested the Philippine court system, composed of Supreme Court and lower courts. The 1987 Philippine Constitution was drafted by a constitutional assembly that was mandated in Proclamation Number 3. The commission composed 50 members appointed by the President Corazon Aquino from various backgrounds. The final draft of the 1987 Constitution was finished on October 12, 1986, and was presented to President Aquino on October. The Constitution was ratified on February 8, 1987 through a nationwide plebiscite. The 1987 Constitution operates since 1987 during the administration of Cory Aquino, Fidel Ramos, Joseph Estrada, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, Benigno Aquino III, the current administration of Rodrigo Roa Duterte. The preamble of the 1987 Constitution reads, "We, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God, in order to build a just and humane society and establish a government that shall embody our ideals and aspirations, promote the common good, conserve and develop our patrimony, and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of law and a regime of truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace, do ordain and promulgate this Constitution.